So welcome again. You should see on your computer our very first slide, and we're going to jump right in. So just as a reminder for Zoom, I know we're all learning and we're continually learning about all of the platforms that we have, but you should know that you have the control bar at the bottom of the screen, and that's kind of how you navigate everything. You guys have been pretty good this morning, making sure your microphone is muted. Your video, it says off unless you want it, unless you're speaking. I don't think we have so many people that you don't have to have your video on. You could this morning if you want to. We would like you to open the chat because we are going to use that feature in just a minute, and we're going to ask people to respond in the chat box. So please make sure you have that open. You can see where it is there on your control bar. And then you may want to open the participants window to see who is here. And that way you can also control some of the other features for your personal interaction on Zoom this morning. This is kind of what your screen could look like. You could have that share window open, and then on the right side, you could have the participants window at the top or on the side, as well as the chat window. We would suggest that you do what's best for you, but we would like you, again, to have that chat window open because we're going to use that in a second. If you would like an interactive version of the presentation, or you would like to watch the slides, or you would like to look at the slides after the presentation, this is our bit.ly. It will have everything that we're going to be presenting to you as far as content is concerned. So I'll give you a minute to either copy that down, take a picture of it, or try to get there. It is bit.ly/PBIS Leaders October. And thank you, Stephanie, just put that in the chat so we can go ahead and move on. If you did not get a chance to get that, you can click on it directly from the chat and have access to that presentation. So we're going to start with this or that. That's hard to say because it sounded like a Z. We're going to start with a this or that this morning just to kind of get us warmed up. And what we're going to ask you to do is just post in the chat your preferences on these particular items. All we want you to do is post one or the other in the chat. So we're going to start with number 1. Netflix, Hulu, or Amazon Prime. What do you guys think? Are you a Netflix person, a Hulu person, or an Amazon Prime person? Seen a lot of Netflix. Oh, there's an Amazon Prime. Another Amazon Prime. Oh, there's a Hulu person. Michelle's a Hulu person. Okay. Amazon Prime for kids. Okay. I know I have all 3, but we tend to watch Netflix, I think, a little more. Netflix and Hulu. Thanks, Kara. Amazon. Thank you, Vicki. Okay, so you guys are seeing that we're going to kind of use the chat today for, we're going to get into actually real content in a minute, but we're going to kind of practice a little bit with these kind of fun questions. All right, let's do the next one. So we have a lot of Amazon and Netflix folks with us today. What about this next question? How about pizza or taco? Are you a pizza person or a taco person? Ooh, a lot of pizza. Okay, tacos. Seen a lot of pizza come through. Thanks. Jess Haynes said tacos with a lot of exclamation points. Both is good. Absolutely. Pizza. I know in my house, it's probably tacos, but we do pizza too. All right, let's do the last one. Our last kind of fun question for this morning before we jump right in. Thanks, Beth. Tacos. Beth says tacos as well. Our last question will be card game or board game? What do you prefer? Would you rather play cards or would you rather play a board game like Clue or Monopoly, Risk? Okay, the first people joined in with a lot of board games. Okay, that surprises me. I thought we'd see more cards there. But Brando LP says cards. Brandon or Brando says cards. We have Lisa saying cards too, but we have a lot of board games as well. Very good. So we just wanted to kind of check in and loosen everybody up, getting people used to being in the chat this morning. And we're going to actually go on to our first question this morning that's actually a real question and not a fun question. And if you see me turn, my dog is knocking at my door, so I just throw that out there. He wants to get in here and see me. So what we're going to do is we're going to do this one a little bit differently. What I'm going to ask you to do is type your answer in the chat, but do not hit enter. In other words, answer the question as you would type it, but don't hit enter until I say hit enter, because we're going to do a little bit of an interactive activity this morning. So the question that I want you to think about is, what is something that you have learned from someone at school this year? That could be from a student, from a colleague, parent, fellow PBIS team member, or really anybody else that you're interacting with. So have you learned something new, or what have you learned new from one of these folks this year? Go ahead and type that in the chat, and I'm going to stop talking and give you a minute. And then I'm going to have everybody hit enter at the same time, but don't do it yet. What is something that you have learned from someone at school this year? I'll give you about another 30 seconds. When I say enter, what I would like you to do is two things. You're going to hit enter, and then you're going to look at the chat box. And what you're going to do is you're going to start a private chat with the person who ends up below you about whatever it was that you learned from someone this year. If you are the last person on the list with that answer, you'll go back to the first person on the list. So once you've hit enter, you're going to find yourself on the chat box list, and then you're going to start a private chat with the person who appears underneath you. So to do that, when on your chat box, you have an option to either chat everyone, or you can pull up a specific person in the chat box. What we want you to do is pull up whoever that person is beneath you, and then just kind of talk. We'll give you a minute or two to talk about what you learned this year from someone new. So I'm going to count to 3, and I'm going to say enter. And then when I do that, I would like you guys to hit your enter button and then go forward with the buddy chat. 1, 2, 3, enter. So as folks are still entering, make sure you find the person below you and then privately chat them about your answer. All right, we'll go ahead and ask you to wrap up your conversations. Oh, okay, it's saying that you can only choose the hosts. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on then. Sorry about that. Okay, so as we move on with our session this morning, we are going to then talk a little bit about two topics. The first one is going to be check in, check out during remote learning. And then we're going to finish up with coming back to school after a crisis situation or after disruption in school. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to Steph, and she's going to walk you through a couple of the check in, check out considerations for remote learning.
Good morning, everybody. So check in, check out, as a reminder, is a tier 2 intervention. And this means that what I wanted to do today is start with a couple of the ground rules and the basic decision rules for identifying which students in your building may benefit from tier 2 supports. So on your first slide of this section, you are going to see Swiss basic behavioral decisions. So Heidi, if you could click forward.
Yep.
Thanks, Heidi.
Mm-hmm.
So the ones on the screen here are for Swiss. And as a reminder for those of you that are in districts that aren't using this as a data system, Swiss stands for School-Wide Information System. So these rules on the screen now are the ones that Swiss has adopted. For screening, they use a traditional rule of thumb by looking first at the referrals of students. So on the left, you see ODR, which stands for Office Discipline Referral. And your school may already do this or might want to expand those just to see, to kind of cast a wider net and catch more students than just those that are having office discipline referrals for those outward externalizing behaviors. But the first rule of thumb is that students that have more than 2 referrals would really be a good candidate for tier 2 intervention. And again, this is a standard kind of screening general rule. The other rule that was adopted by Swiss was the rule of 10, and you see that on the right-hand side. And this says that if you have 10 or more students doing the same thing at the same time, then it's really a systems issue. And these should be addressed by your tier 1 PBIS team. If it's fewer than 10 students, it's likely an individual or a small group issue. And at that point, you'll look for groups of similar behaviors and put those students in a homogeneous group for tier 2 intervention. Okay, so again, these are some general rules to get you thinking. And remember, just because things are systems level doesn't mean it automatically has to become a priority. But these are just some rules to get you thinking about who would benefit from check in, check out. So when thinking about when to identify and begin tier 2 interventions, the national data suggests that screening should start in or around October, which is why we brought this topic to you today. By November, schools should be providing students with levels or tiers of support that they need to be successful. And in actively screening, we're trying to reduce the number of total referrals that you'll see in your building. So the number of minutes a student is out of their instructional environment, the number of referrals individual students receive, and the staff's time spent on addressing problem behaviors across the school. So this is sometimes called the October catch. And those of you that have worked with us before have heard this. And screening is really recommended about 6 weeks after each major break. So our next slide will show the October catch. And what this slide has, as we click through, are black lines to represent October catch, February catch, and April catch. And we know timelines for the start of school have shifted this year with the current pandemic, but this is, again, just some general guidance. And when you use this October catch mentality, or a 6-week kind of scoop up for your tier 2 candidates, it's based in research that you can hypothesize a 20% decrease for students who would have ended the year with 2 to 5 referrals, and an overall 30% decrease for students who were on target to receive 6 or more referrals by the end of the year. So this means that a school with about 500 students can reduce overall referrals by 150 and regain about 25 to 75 hours of staff time. And nobody on this call, I think, would say that they have too much time with their kids. And so this is just kind of a general tone setter for this morning and a reminder to get you guys thinking. So we are going to look at now the frame for check in, check out. And again, this might be a reminder to some, but just to kind of go back to go forward about what check in, check out looks like in remote learning. So this is the intervention that you're familiar with, okay? And before we could look at what changes in a virtual format for this intervention, we wanted to recap the overall framework. So check in, check out is a tier 2 group-oriented standardized intervention. And these are designed for students with problem behaviors that either are unresponsive to tier 1 general practices, for students that do not require more immediate individualized interventions, and those students that are observed across, like have problem behaviors across multiple settings or contexts. So we always say, as a training team for tier 2, it is the hardest tier to put together, because in buildings you usually do for all kids, and if it doesn't work, you resort to more individualized response or intervention. Check in, check out, and tier 2 overall will put a pause on that and ask you to look for patterns of behavior. So this really is a standardized intervention. So first, as you see in this little visual on your screen, a student would be identified as needing additional behavior support. Next, the behavioral expectations for the students are defined, and they would be documented on a DPR, and that stands for Daily Progress Report. Third, the student begins to receive a regular cycle of prompts and feedback from teachers and family for meeting those behavioral expectations. So you choose a person to be the check-in, check-out, your teachers throughout the day that support that student or family members at home, which we'll talk about in a minute, will be giving regular feedback on those behavioral expectations. Then the student data is generated by that DPR on a daily basis and is used by your team to monitor progress and make decisions about how effective this is as an intervention. So the chart on your screen provides that visual representation of the daily and weekly components of that intervention cycle. So as you can see here, the daily components of this intervention are that check-in, regular times for feedback, check-out, data collection, monitoring, and family participation. So while in a brick and mortar setting, your students are reminded each day to take that DPR home, and this allows an opportunity to receive additional feedback from a parent or a guardian at home. The parents are then typically asked to sign and return the DPR to school the following day. Okay, so now that we've been reminded about the traditional setup for the intervention, let's look at how it changes in a virtual format. So it would be easy to focus on the changes necessary for that tangible DPR and behavior ratings, but it's critical to keep these things that you see on the screen in mind when you're making those adaptations. So today we're going to go big picture with our recommendation, but we're going to leave you with some resources for modifying the actual reports and using technology for check-in times. So the first consideration here is training for your staff. So as a reminder, as is typical in any new school year, the students selected for this intervention last year are with new teachers. And so if your students are exhibiting some behaviors that make them again candidates for this intervention, it's the time of year that students really need some training, and staff also need training about what the intervention is and what their expectations are. Okay, this is really critical because students may be going into classrooms and the staff that they are with now may not have had a student on check-in, check-out before. So new staff may be needed to train. Second, for students that are still participating in any level of remote instruction, even a hybrid, home is now a setting for rating and feedback, which is drastically different. It can be difficult for our students to make that shift in expectations when instruction takes place at home. So sure, this is a familiar context to them, but it is not one that is typically designed for structured learning. So families may need help getting students to identify a distraction-free environment for their learning, how to log in on time, how to attend to instruction and keep engaged, how to troubleshoot technology, and complete independent work. And I'm sure you guys have been troubleshooting these things for the weeks prior to this session. So beyond schoolwork, it may be useful to consider whether families could benefit from extending that check-in, check-out support to non-instructional routines as well, such as their chores or free time and meal prep. To assist families in implementing this at home, your staff might want to consider coaching families in their own tier 1 supports for a behavior school system, or teaching them about check-in, check-out, and helping your students self-monitor. The next consideration, number 3 you see here, is programming for flexibility. So Heidi, if you could go back, I'm still on that last screen. This is something that we've had a lot of practice in, being flexible over the last 6, 7, who knows what month it is, here in the pandemic, but it's important to recognize that some families may not be able to take on any additional responsibilities, and that's just the reality we're in. So the implementation and monitoring of check and check out to put that on families may be an additional stress. In these cases, it's better to probably pause with check and check out as an intervention while students are using all complete remote learning to avoid adding that additional stress. You could also revise to reflect the student's new schedule. So options for that could include rating for only one subject. Maybe on the DPR, you include a time that check and check out would be most needed or the most practical for the student. You could rate each distance learning activity, such as when they're on live instruction, when they're doing independent work, which realistically includes student self-monitoring, or rating for the student's full schedule. And I mentioned that earlier about how are they doing breakfast, remote learning, dinner, chores, etc. The last one here on the slide is less classroom teacher availability for ratings. So teacher schedules have shifted drastically. They may not have as much time to rate behavior if they are able to do so at all. So classroom teachers may be busy troubleshooting student tech issues. They might be starting and ending synchronous lessons. And of course, if your students are at home, they might not be present at all to rate behaviors. So it's important to be flexible with the ratings about who rates, how many times per day, etc. One idea that is available in the research is using technology for those check-ins. And that could be using text from the check-in person, brief video chats, or pre-recorded daily greetings that students can view from their check-in or check-out mentor that teachers can send to students ahead of time, and students and families can then view on their own time frame from home. So those are some of the considerations. Now, when you think about check-in, check-out, we're going to go to the next slide.
So before we do that stuff, there was some activity in the chat box. I just wanted to check in.
Okay, good.
Going. And I know Michelle's monitoring that. Was there anything we need to bring up, Michelle?
No, nothing new in the chat box.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. Go ahead, Steph.
Thanks, Heidi. Thanks, Michelle. So the first part of your check-in, check-out is screening. And so thinking about that for remote learning, a first great step for your team is to revisit which students in your building are currently receiving this level of support, or which ones would be good candidates for it. So remember that a move to remote learning may change student behavior support needs. Some students that needed check-in, check-out at school might not need it at home, and others who didn't need it at school may have really increased behaviors at home that could benefit from this using during distance learning. So for any student enrolled in check-in, check-out before the change, it is important to reassess their needs to see if this would be helpful, okay? So this reassessment could be formal, or it could be a periodic check-in to monitor progress. Your team might want to consider new universal screening methods. And what we're going to do on the next slide is look at 2 examples. There's many out there right now, but being away from school cuts off those natural opportunities to connect with students and your families. So we're really promoting doing a district or a school wellness check to identify which students or which families are in need of support. What you see on this slide, and if you're following along in the bit.ly, there are 2 of these universal screeners, is what we'll call them for today, for identifying behavior support needs for your students and the families. So here's 2 examples that might be new to you. First is a wellness check survey, and this one came from the Center on PBIS, and I know it's small here, so again, you could click on the title there, it's a hyperlink that'll bring you to each document. And I want you to note the addition of the family questions on this one. In a traditional Tier 2 system, buildings typically have a nomination form that staff can use to recommend students for Tier 2 supports. This is sometimes extended to parent-family nomination forms for the same purpose. And this form here explicitly asks what support families may need and how remote learning is going with their students at home. Okay, and the second one is very similar, and it's called My Teacher Wants to Know. So we're going to give you a second now just to click through those. When you're done clicking, and Heidi, I'm going to take it back to you because I don't know if we were able to fix the issue with the chat box.
Yeah, I don't believe we have. So
Okay.
we'll have to just on the fly change what we were going to do.
Okay. So let's open it up. And on the next slide, instead of chatting with your buddy, if you could take a minute to answer this question in the chat and just send to all. But what have you done or what are you planning to do to assess the student support needs or the family support needs? So thinking about those two universal screeners is kind of the prompt here for you guys to be thinking about. And we'd love to hear what's really going on in your buildings and in your districts. So take a minute and in the chat, please respond to this question. What have you done or what are you planning on doing to assess support needs at this moment?
Sounds like a lot of folks are serving family and community and check-ins. I know there was a question earlier from Lee about how are you engaging parents? That might be one way you could engage parents is through survey. Looks like Stacy's saying that they have set up engagement teams that all parents have been personally contacted multiple times by admin to address needs. That's pretty impressive.
Stacy, I'm wondering if you could, if you would feel comfortable unmuting and telling us more about those engagement teams. Specific question I have is, are you using those to identify students for Tier 2 support and, you know, even informally, but are you keeping track of which students are contacted and which are unavailable? Would you mind unmuting and telling us more? I see, Stacy, that's okay.
Hey, Stephanie. Since Stacy's mic isn't working, my kids actually are enrolled in her district. So I can tell you personally, I've been contacted by somebody from the engagement team, I think 3 or 4 times since we've started remote learning. So they're doing a nice job with that.
Awesome. Stacy, you got a shout out.
Yay.
Thank you, Shannon.
Always working through the tech issues.
I had another question as well. Sherry Peters put, we do SOS. Sherry, would you mind telling me what that stands for and what that looks like?
Yeah, so SOS is signs of suicide. So we do the signs of suicide curriculum. We do it at set grade levels. And then when we are not doing the formal process at set grade levels, we do refreshers every year. And it is all about acknowledging and telling someone when there are concerns about a student. So it highlights those kids who are depressed and those kids that we need to check in with right away. And then they're put on our radar because they may have wanted to harm themselves or thought about it, or they know someone who has. So then that creates a group right away for us, and it puts those kids on our radar to support them more.
The other thing I would add, if you're not familiar, thanks, Sherry, that's awesome, is that there is a behavioral and mental health screening compendium that I could send out. It is housed on ODE's website under the PBIS page. And it's about 40 or 50 different screeners that you can use for different purposes, behavioral, mental health. I think there might be some suicide ideation ones on there as well. So there are things out there that you guys can use. I know historically in the past, there are some districts that are not always willing to use some of these screeners because they identify, and then once you identify, the district is beholden to then follow up on that. But if there are if that's something that you guys are interested in, it's a compendium, and it has 30 or 40 or 45 different screeners that you can look at too.
I also see from Care Walter, she's looking for suggestions from others to help, and she's principal at a middle school saying that they're way off their normal mark. So my next question to the group, and Heidi, I'm going off our screen here, off script.
That's okay.
But are any of you using check in, check out during a hybrid or remote instruction and having a lot of success? That would mind sharing kind of what your overall process is and how it's going.
Okay, I'm seeing in the chat that there's a need for that.
So I don't feel like we're necessarily having a problem identifying our students, because we are using a lot of the similar things that we've used in the past. And overall, my teachers are really good at looking for those things. And we're kind of had to have a lot of conversations about how to look differently, because we have a different learning environment and kids' emotional states are very different. But we have a bunch of students, but we are struggling so much to help them and intervene, because oftentimes they are not showing up remotely. So even if we are establishing those times and we have the best of intentions, the things that we are trying to put in place have failed. I mean, we're trying, it is not working. So I am really looking for something else, especially the kids when they're at home remotely. When we're on a hybrid, so when they're in the building, we can put some of those traditional things in place that are working, that face-to-face, having those discussions, doing our groups. But when they are home, we are struggling with that.
So Steph, maybe that's something that we could talk about as a region supporting schools with, and maybe that could be another time to meet and generate ideas, or maybe gather some other resources. I'm sure that in the limited time we have this morning, we could not do all of that, but maybe we can set aside some time for anybody else that might be having those same issues or same struggles. I don't know. What is your thought?
My thought is I agree. My thought is I hear you, Karen. I'm not sure what to give you in the moment, so I'm going to text you and call you later.
That's okay. I would love to even meet with other people and bounce ideas off of them. I'm struggling because a few of us had an idea of trying to make some type of like Google Doc check in, check out, where the teachers could just kind of get on, and it was like 3 check sheets for that kid. But I also feel like my teachers are incredibly overwhelmed. Many of my best teachers are holding on by a thread because, you know, they really want the kids to be successful, and they're having struggles with the kids, like I said, getting on or engaging remotely, in addition to having all the other things that are going on and using technology and, you know, the stressors of parents. So then I struggle on how to have them do one more thing. Like, I can't take any more like peas and corn and mashed potatoes off their plate because they are heaping full. And I don't know the balance to that. And I am struggling as a leader to be able to support my staff, to support the kids. And there's just too many breakdowns. So I would love if somebody had figured out how to build a bridge, because I would build one too if I could.
And I think we could absolutely continue this conversation for any of you that are interested, or it could be before our next virtual, which is going to be another month away. If it's a conversation that people would like to engage in before that, we could absolutely provide the platform for that, and bring people together if they would like to have that conversation. I'm happy to do that. I'm sure our team is happy to do that.
The last thing I'll point out, and then I'm turning it over to Stacy, and we're going to hear from Cloverleaf. On the next slide are some resources, and Care the MTSS behavior guide and discussion guide might be a good one for a lot of you that are thinking about it. There's a student monitoring and referral while virtual. That's a wellness report that looks at things beyond traditional behavioral markers. So things like non-attendance, food instability, poor sleeping. And so it really gets at some of those underlying factors that could be contributing to what you're seeing. So this is plenty more resources we put together that we couldn't cover in the time for this call, but might be a good place to get you guys some next steps.
So Lee had a great suggestion about maybe starting a folder, Google folder, and we can start maybe getting some of this stuff into one physical location that people can access, and we would be happy to do that.
All right. Well, as we've been talking, so many of the things that you've just all shared are going to just be reinforced and highlighted in this next section as we think about returning to school during and after a crisis. Because we know throughout the region, some of you are back 5 days a week, some of you are still 100% remote, and some of you have combinations. So we really wanted to think about what do you need to consider as you go back, and just the importance of schools being that safe place for kids. And that's probably more important now than ever, that students feel that school is a safe place for them. So Heidi, if you can go ahead and advance us to the next slide. We just wanted to share briefly a couple considerations that I think as I'm listening to the conversations, a lot of you have already thought about these things, but we just wanted to highlight a few. And the article is linked at the bottom of this slide, which has even more information and embedded resources, but really taking the time to think about reteaching not only expectations, but also classroom routines, and just the importance of those basic foundations of your PBIS framework. Because as we think about those expectations and the routines, those really bring stability for children. And when they have stability and they can predict what's going to happen next, it adds to that level of security and safety for children, and how important that is right now, because we know that all adults, all children, everyone involved is processing this time differently. And if kids can have that consistent routine and they understand what the expectations are, they're seeing them modeled, it really just helps them feel safe in the environment they're in. The second piece is really, this is probably my favorite piece of PBIS, if you can go back, Heidi, is really focusing on positive and avoid punitive approaches. And the thing about PBIS that I share probably more than any other piece is that the behavior you focus on is the behavior you get. And so taking that time to make sure we're really acknowledging those behaviors we want, and probably need to do this even more than ever, because kids are needing that reinforcement even more. So taking that time to really focus on the positive. So not only are we reteaching it and we're modeling it, we're really focusing on attending to what is happening that we want to continue to acknowledge. And then that next point, get to know your students again, just that importance of relationships. We had an administrator share yesterday that they feel like they really need to just push pause and focus on relationships, because it's so important for kids to feel that they're valued and that they fit in, and they have a place that they can talk, and really look at their strengths. And this is another place, maybe it's a good time to do one of those inventories of kids' strengths and let them share with you, what do they like? What do they feel are their strengths? And how can you then incorporate that and acknowledge that and help them, not even in just social emotional, but that helps with academics as well. And then this is the piece I think we're hearing from all of you, is looking for those signs that students might need more help. You're seeing some of those signs, and really considering the fact that maybe some of the kids that need additional help right now are not the typical students that needed help before. As I said, everyone's processing this time frame differently. And so really being proactive about thinking maybe about some of those screeners like Stephanie shared that are a little bit more informal, maybe just getting some input from them. And I know just even I work with a group of 8th grade girls, and how they're so much more willing to even jot something on a note card and share it with me, as opposed to sharing it, speaking out loud about something. So just giving kids kind of just different modes of how they can share what's going on, so that you can be sure to make sure if they need extra help, we can identify that. And then that last bullet, which all of you were sharing about, is how do we re-engage families as partners? One of the things we have heard a lot from teachers, from administrators, is that during this time of COVID, because of the virtual connections, some of you have actually connected more with parents than you ever have in the past. And so if that's happening, then how can you continue that? How can you continue to help families feel like they are a part of the community and a part of what's going on? But then the flip of that is, if they're not engaging, what can we start to think about? How can we, just like even in this format, share what's working and what's not, and so that we can begin to engage families even further to help them feel like they're a part of the education and what's going on in their child's day-to-day life. So we wanted to go ahead on the next slide and just share a couple quick resources. The first one, when we're thinking about teaching, one of the challenges I'm sure all of you have experienced, I know I've experienced, is when you're wearing a mask, it's really hard to show emotion in your face. And that's something that as humans, we look at people's faces to gauge the emotion. And so this handout, it was designed for young children, 0 to 5, but actually the suggestions on it would be good for anyone. And my favorite one on there is the number 2, talks about pairing American Sign Language and emotion signs while you're wearing a mask, so that everyone can kind of start to have a second way to communicate. And there's actually a live link to YouTube video where someone is just sharing what those signs are. And it's just a real quick video, but we thought, what a great way to use another mode of communication when your face is covered, and just really help students, staff, everyone to be able to communicate those emotions a little bit differently, since we can't see each other's faces right now. So just a way to teach, another way to think about it. And then the second piece is Cloverleaf Middle School Matrix. We have Shannon Trexler on the call with us today, and she's going to actually share their COVID style matrix and share about that teaching process. So if we can go ahead and go to the next slide, I'm going to turn it over to Shannon just to share a couple minutes about what they're doing in Cloverleaf.
Good morning, everyone. So I'm new to Cloverleaf this year, and Cloverleaf is in year 2 of implementation of PBIS. So last year they had already created their matrix. They were working through their lessons and all of that. And then COVID hit, and we kind of had to start over in the sense that the matrix and the lessons that we were using didn't really go with what our expectations are for this year. So we took our old matrix and then we added some language in there that made sense to, our current situation. So in the first one there in the classroom, obviously maintaining 6 feet social distancing, we were able to achieve that all day for our students. So we mapped out, taped off all of our rooms, and students are remaining 6 feet apart at all times. So just that reminder in there. Also, you'll notice on the matrix in the safe column that almost all of them, I believe, have the wear your mask. And then there's some additional ones of disinfecting your areas and things like that. So since we're in middle school, we do allow our students to use the alcohol-based wipes that are safe for them to use. So they are kind of in charge of also cleaning their spaces when they feel, the need to do so. We've done a lot of lesson planning as well. We took our old lessons that we used last year, and then we revamped them and completely redid some of them to include things like how to appropriately wear your mask for, the right fit on your nose and below your chin. We've shown them in our lessons the signage around the building and what that means, with some of the walking spaces in our hallways that are one way only, an up stairwell and a down ramp kind of thing. So kind of teaching them how to move around our building differently. With the 6th graders, that was no problem, because this is the only thing that they know. This is their first time being in the building. But some of our 7th and 8th grade, or all of our 7th and 8th grade students, are used to using our building differently. So we also are having lunch in our homeroom classrooms. So we're not even utilizing our cafeteria for lunch or breakfast. So we had to add that piece. You can see on there, it says classroom breakfast and lunch. So our students stay in their homerooms, as I stated, for those times as well. So that had to look different. The way they dispose of trash looked different. The way they were picking up breakfast, because breakfasts are delivered to the classroom to avoid the lines in the morning. So we've put a lot of time and effort into revamping what they were doing last year to really fit with the needs of this year. My team did an awesome job of putting this together in just a couple of days. We came back, teachers had about 2 weeks prior to students getting here. And that was filled with PD and other things. But one of those things was the PBIS team getting together to be able to put all of this together. We obviously then created a schedule to roll out the lessons that we got done in the first week. And just so that our students were aware of what our expectations are. A lot of people were really concerned about the masks being an issue during the school day and, preteens just not being compliant with them. And we just have not seen that to be a problem. There's definitely kiddos that have needed reminders. But for the most part, a kid slips it down and the teacher says, hey, please put your mask back up. And they do it. So it's not that awkward social thing that even I was thinking that maybe at this level, kids were going to be embarrassed in front of their peers wearing them. But it's kind of so normal at this point that it just hasn't been a problem. Our PTO also did, as part of a fall, fundraiser, did have on their T-shirt order. They also had the masks that had the school logo on it as well for parents to be able to purchase for students. And that's kind of been a big hit too, because it kind of normalizes how we do things around here now. Is whether you like it or hate it, it is what it is. And so our students are definitely using the masks as a part of their accessories, I'd say. So we've had a pretty easy going school year so far, knock on wood. Our Swiss referrals are down from what they were at this point last year. And that's mainly because our students are staying put in their home bases and our teachers are rotating. And we've taken out the cafeteria, which is a huge problem usually in most school districts. They're staying there. We don't have them walking in the hallways. And once they're kind of in that home base, that's where they stay for the majority of the time. So we've actually seen a decrease just because of the way we're set up here this year. I also have an awesome teacher leader on my PBIS team that has helped me tremendously make sure that all of these little bits and pieces have been put together to make this happen. And Dom Wilson is who my teacher leader is. And so we're really working collaboratively to make our team here at Cloverleaf a teacher-led team and not an administrator-led team. And he's done a really nice job this year so far.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Shannon, thank you so much for sharing. If anybody would want to pop a question into the chat box for Shannon, feel free to do that. And maybe we can, if somebody has a question, we could answer that. And then we're getting kind of to the end of our time. We have 1 or 2 other things to tell you guys about. But does anybody have a question before we kind of wrap up what we've talked about? You're getting some good feedback, Shannon. This looks great. I'm seeing in the chat. Any questions for Shannon? Thanks again, Shannon, for being willing to share your process with us. I think the intent of our network is to have people share what they're doing and to learn from one another. It's not, you guys don't really learn from your SST folks. You learn from doing the work in the buildings and learning from one another. So we're really appreciative when you're willing to share and put out things that you've been doing, because I think it's very helpful for everyone else.
No problem.